US housing?
I think it's more a reflection of Australian housing. If we have a look at where these job losses come from, the majority of it is from the Australian market. There will be around about 1,000 job losses, and 885 of them are due to come from Australia and only 115 from the US. We know that the US housing market has been seeing a bit of green shoots, but a very different case here in Australia, where we are seeing a cyclical downturn. We have seen Boral being exposed to those construction earnings, and construction earnings at the best of times can be quite volatile. If we have a look at Boral as a company, it is quite capital intensive. And I guess the difference between a company like Boral and, say, CSR, which is another company which is exposed to the construction market here in Australia, is that Boral has debt and CSR doesn't really have any debt. And that means when we do see cyclical downturns, it does come under pressure to be able to cut costs, batten down the hatches, and really wait for recovery. So if we have a look at EBIT cover, it's around probably about 4 times, and that means if we do see a prolonged downturn in this construction industry here in Australia, then we are going to see Boral quite vulnerable. We've also seen a new MD, the Managing Director Mike Kane, came on board in September, and since then we've seen a number of changes. So he's implemented a number of changes. The first big one was really that clinker plant in Victoria, which was closed down in favour of cheaper imports from Asia, and a big part of that was the Aussie dollar. And now we're seeing another reduction in costs through the loss of jobs. So it does look like since he's come on board, he's implemented a number of changes, but it's all about reducing costs until we see recovery in this area. If we have a look at Boral shares over the last year, it's quite an interesting chart actually with this one, because we saw Mike Kane, the new CEO, coming on board in September, and you can see that since then we've seen Boral shares rising. In fact, over the last 3 months we've seen Boral shares rising by around about 15%.
Sent out performance over the following year, if it gives it the flick, what are their chances in the next 6 months? How do you judge market conditions such that NAB might make a move to offload?
I think the chances are pretty big. We've seen moves already by NAB to distance itself from its UK businesses, which have been struggling. And NAB, if we have a look at it compared to its peers, it is the cheapest out of the bunch. Now, it's cheap for a reason, but if we do see a spin-off of its UK assets, or a bigger distancing of its UK assets, then we could see a re-rating of the stock. And I think we've started to see that really come through for NAB. So NAB, looking the cheapest out of the big four, if we do see those UK assets being sold off, I think that will be very attractive to NAB, and we will see a re-rating of the stock. But of course, over the last 12 months, we've already seen moves by the company to really distance itself from those UK assets which have been struggling. And in regards to, I guess, getting in on some of these stocks, really the market moves before the economy moves. And if we have a look at the building material and the building products area, this is one area where we have seen the industry, the sector, moving ahead of the economy on expectations that we'll start to see a cyclical uptick. We have a look at a company like James Hardie, which is hugely exposed to that US building market. Well, we saw James Hardie shares moving upwards well in advance of a year before we actually saw the green shoots coming through from the US economy. And we're seeing the same with those building companies which are exposed to the Australian residential market or construction market. We've already started to see the move there on expectations that in the next 12 to 18 months that we will start to see a cyclical uptick in this industry.
Peter?